So lately I've really transitioned my focus of how to quantify a training session to this concept of RPE. And if you've done any of the training programs or followed along with me, you might have seen this pop up lately and you're like, what in the world is this? What am I supposed to do with this thing? I don't know what RPE is, so we're going to just break that down a little bit today. RPE simply stands for rate of perceived exertion. I'm asking you to give a number from 1 to 10 is the scale I'm going to use for how hard something is. It might be an individual exercise, it might be an exercise variation, or it might be a full training session or effort in terms of conditioning and things like that. So we often think of RPE, going back to that conditioning piece. If I told you to run a mile and I said I want you to hold 8 out of 10 pace, you can kind of gauge that, right? Like that's what RPE is generally known for. It's also a great tool from a resistance training standpoint. We're going to talk more about that today. So I just have 10 through 7 here on the board. Obviously the scale can go lower, and we can talk about how to use this best in a resistance training standpoint. So an example, I might say I want you to complete 4 sets of 6 repetitions at an RPE of 7. So when you're building up to an RPE of 7, you're taking your warm-up sets, you're figuring out what that 7 is for you. I want you to basically visualize and try to decipher when you get to a weight where you could still do 3 additional repetitions at that load. So maybe I have 4x6 scheduled, but really you could do 4x9 if we were pushing it all the way to a max effort. But you're going to stay at 4x6 at that RPE of 7, and essentially you're leaving 3 repetitions in the bag for every set. Okay? And then we'll discuss a little bit of why that's important over time. But if I move you up to an RPE of 8, you're essentially picking a weight that you could still do 2 additional repetitions. We went to an RPE of 9, 1 additional repetition. Maybe you could squeak out 1 more. If we hit an RPE of 10, it means that is the most you can do for that amount of repetitions. You could not do 1 more. You could barely even start the next repetition if I asked you to. All right? And you see how you can learn to figure out your loads based off of going off of feel. And as an athlete, being able to develop this touch point of knowing what it feels like and really putting a number to something that's a little bit more feel-based is a really good skill to have. So when we're training, one thing I want you to focus on is with resistance training, I aim to be around an 8 to an 8.5 on average for RPE. And that's talking about resistance training. So when we're loading or using a band or a dumbbell and we're focusing on that, I look for it to be right around an 8.5 or an 8 in that range, 8 to 8.5 for how that RPE feels for you. This is individual. It's not how it feels for your sister, your brother, your fiance, husband, wife, best friend. It's for you. How does this RPE feel for you? Okay, and the reason I like that 8 to 8.5 is because we're going to push progress, right? We're getting above that 80% threshold of training, and it's going to have some value there. It also is not pushing up into this 9 and 10 where the chance of injury starts to come up a little bit. And it's a great substitute to max testing. So what I mean by max testing, if I loaded up a barbell or grabbed the heaviest dumbbell possible and tried to test you to see your strongest weight for that amount of repetitions, honestly, there's just not a whole lot of value for the clientele that I work with. There's definitely a point where max testing is valuable, but it's kind of few and far between for who is generally training and even athletes looking for that general progress point and looking to continuously have progress throughout the course of their life. So by using this RPE, goal for resistance training right around an 8, 8.5, and then we every once in a while we'll go up into a 9, and sometimes that'll happen, but for longevity's sake and progress sake, we're going to hit for the 8 to 8.5 out of 10. Not only is it effective in helping you pick a weight, it's also effective in helping you pick a variation of a movement. So I'm going to use a pull-up, for example. Pull-ups are really challenging for people, right? If I said I want you to do 4 sets of 3 repetitions of an unassisted pull-up, and you can't even do 1, that means it's over a 10 on the RPE scale for you. An unassisted pull-up is over a 10 on the RPE scale. If we're trying to stay in that 8 to 8.5 range, you got to switch in a variation that works for you. It's still a vertical pulling motion, so we're still seeing the value there of that movement type, but we're getting away from this 10. So maybe you attach a band to the pull-up bar and you complete a pull-up that way. Maybe you set a barbell up high enough or a TRX and you keep your feet on the ground, your back still stays nice and straight, and you're completing a pull-up that way. Whatever helps drift that back down to that 8 or 8.5 range is super valuable to helping with injury prevention while still progressing performance. It also gives you the goggles, the training goggles, to figure out what variation fits you and your programming. It makes it more individual to your approach. So that's how you can use it for resistance training. That's how you can use it for exercise selection. And the biggest key with the exercise selection point is if it's a squat variation, figure out a squat variation that works for you and drifts it back into this range. And there you can still have value and you can make the program adapted to fit your needs and your ability levels. Because if we're riding too high here up in this 9 to 10 range for too long, things like illness start to pop up, overtraining starts to happen. You can start plateauing because you're just kind of pushing too hard for too long, and then you start to slow down. On race day or whenever you're going for your goal, yeah, you're going to be up there in that 10 range, right? We're going to send it. We're going to go for it. We're going to go for broke and try to achieve. But in training, for a longevity standpoint, and to have that continuous progress pathway, we're going to sit right around that 8 to 8.5. And this might vary too, it might vary on different movement types. And you can use this as either a way to figure out what weight you're supposed to utilize, or you can figure out what type of exercise or what type of variation you need to set in. Another thing to think about, if we go back to this from a weight standpoint, maybe I selected 4x6 and based off your progress, you were supposed to be right around 100 pounds for the variation of the movement this week. But 100 pounds feels like an 8 or a 9, or it's even pushing into a 10. Let's just say for the sake of this, it went 9.5. You felt like it was a 9.5 out of 10. Well, knowing that you should be more toward that 8, maybe you change the weight for that week. Maybe it's just an off week. Maybe you're a little bit behind this week. You didn't get as much sleep. All of a sudden, you can use this RPE scale to adjust the training session to where you are week to week. When you can do that and make those little modifications, you're going to have a more effective training experience for a longer period of time, which is going to lead to results. So that's how you can use RPE. That's how we're going to use it in training, especially moving forward. So whenever you see these numbers, you now have an idea of what we're looking for and how to progress.